When you look back on your childhood, what are the things from that era that stick out the most in your mind? The popular toys? The best music? The fashion trends? Well, if you're anything like me, some of the first memories that come up when looking back on that time are of the TV shows you watched. As time has gone on, kids of each new generation have been treated to a growing range of content created specifically for us. From cartoons and sitcoms, to sketch shows and sing-alongs, to what I feel is arguably one of the most innovative and impactful forms of children's media, educational television shows. It's fair to say that many, if not most of us, have fond memories of growing up with one educational program or another. If you grew up in the 60s and 70s, you witnessed as Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and The Electric Company made history as the first television programs designed specifically to teach children about educational topics. If you were raised in the 90s and early 2000s, like I was, you were treated to shows like Arthur, Blue's Clues, and Barney and Friends, which engaged audiences in new ways and cemented their place as pop culture icons. If you were watching children's television during the 2010s, or even up until today, you saw hits like Word Girl, Yo Gabba Gabba, and Bluey further change the landscape of what subject matter, format, and even sense of humor was thought possible to exist within the world of children's entertainment.
Unicorns, what's your favorite food?
Children.
Oh.
But no matter which era of educational shows you were witnessing, it's likely you were impacted in some way by the colorful characters who played games, sang songs, and taught you life lessons when they popped up on the screen. There are so many fantastic creators here on YouTube who dedicate their channels to exploring the origins, best moments, and cultural impact of the TV shows we grew up watching. One thing I've noticed that sometimes seems to get overlooked, though, is the educational effect these programs had on us when we watched them. On the surface, the things these shows taught us may seem obvious. ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, friendship, playing pretend, problem solving, the list goes on. But the deeper you dive, the more interesting it gets. Children's educational shows, especially the ones that tend to make the longest lasting impact, are carefully crafted using insights from psychology, child development studies, and educational expertise. Some of these things are so carefully woven into the programs that the child audience never even realize some of the deeper lessons they're learning. And it's only when we go back and re-examine them later on as adults that we truly realize just how much these shows really taught us. Which is where I come in. Hi, I'm Professor K. I'm an educator with nearly a decade of experience in the field, and I'm also a learning scientist. Basically, this means I love to study how people learn, and use that research to design things that improve people's learning. I also happen to be kind of a nut for nostalgic children's media, so I've decided to combine these two interests to make Nostalgia EDU. On this channel, I'll be sharing deep dives into nostalgic TV shows, while also digging into how the creators used psychology, specifically theories about how people learn, to teach important lessons that would stick with us long after we stopped watching. Together we'll take a look at shows from the dawn of children's educational television, all the way up to the ones being watched and loved by viewers in the current day and age. So stick around, and hopefully you'll learn something new about your favorite childhood show.
That not only entertains, it educates.
You're right! That's great! What did I just learn again?
Now, normally I'll be dedicating each video I make on this channel to a specific show, walking through several episodes and taking a look at how educational psychology was used by the creators and writers to craft the lessons they were aiming to teach the viewers. But before we deep dive into the shows themselves, I want to use this video to go through a short introduction of the learning theories that I'll be bringing up as we dig into each program. Basically, this video will be more about the theories than the actual shows, but we'll still touch on examples of well-known programs as we go through each theory. Let me start by saying there are so many different theories behind how exactly people learn that you can make an entire series just about that. This makes studying the process of learning pretty messy, and it's easy for things to get complicated just because of how many different ways you can interpret a single thought or act. To keep things simple, I'll be sticking to just 3 main categories: behaviorism, constructivism, and socioculturalism. Depending on who you ask, there are actually 5 or even 7 broader categories, but since most learning theories fall into one of these 3 types, we'll keep it to just these. One more quick disclaimer before we dive in. If you've never studied educational psychology or even psychology in general, don't worry. I'll give you a rundown of everything you need to know as it pertains to TV shows in particular, and hopefully you'll eventually be able to spot examples of these learning theories in action yourself. Okay, I'm done blabbing now. Ready to get into some theories?
As I always say, keep an open mind, and you never know who will walk in.
Now, let's get acquainted with each of these theories and how they interpret the process of learning. We'll start with behaviorism. Behaviorism is the theory you've most likely encountered if you've ever attended school, even if you haven't realized it. A major factor of this theory involves the process of learning through conditioning, which basically boils down to receiving positive reinforcement for good or desirable behavior and negative reinforcement for bad or undesirable behavior. Conditioning is a highly used tool in most classrooms, as teachers tend to give positive reinforcement for quote-unquote good behavior, such as an A for studying the times tables or a piece of candy for following directions. And they'll use negative reinforcement for quote-unquote bad behavior, such as losing a privilege for being unkind to a classmate. These rewards and punishments reinforce the kind of behavior desired by the teacher, which conditions the students to act a certain way. Now, at this point you may be wondering, how does this have anything to do with kids shows? It's not like a TV character can give you a reward or a punishment. And while you're right, a show can't tangibly give you positive or negative reinforcement, it can still encourage the viewer to participate in a way that makes the characters happy or moves the story along. A great example of this is the immensely popular 2000 show Dora the Explorer. The interactive elements of this show help to reinforce certain behaviors in the viewers in the same way teachers do with their students. If you follow the directions given by the map and repeat them back when Dora needs them, then she and Boots will reach their destination by the end of the episode.
How do we get to the big tree? Town, gas station, big tree.
When Swiper the Fox appears, yell, "Swiper, no swiping!" 3 times, and Swiper will run away without stealing anything from Dora.
I need your help to stop Swiper. You have to say, "Swiper, no swiping." Say it with us. Swiper, no swiping. Swiper, no swiping. Swiper, no swiping.
Oh, man!
There are plenty of other more recent children's shows that use this style of conditioning the viewer through interactivity, like Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, and Team Umizoomi. But shows as early as Sesame Street also use this as a tactic for engaging the viewer while also teaching desirable behaviors.
Yes! Woohoo! We made it up the crystals! Thanks for your help, Boomy friend.
So just to review, behaviorism involves positive and negative reinforcement, rewards and punishments. Now we're going to step away from behaviorism to look at the theory that could be seen as its complete opposite, constructivism. I say these two could be considered opposites because instead of focusing on the outside influences that condition learners to behave in a certain way, constructivism takes on the viewpoint that learning takes place entirely inside the mind, and that learners are actively building their own knowledge. The key word here is active. Constructivism pulls learning away from just sitting at a desk and reading a textbook and puts more responsibility in the learner's hands, often placing them in real-world scenarios that encourage problem solving. For me, as a kid who grew up in the early 2000s, it wasn't super common to experience this kind of learning outside of occasional hands-on projects and field trips. But it's become a more common practice as the years have gone on. An example of this would be something like project-based learning, where students focus on larger tasks or questions that they explore and build on over the course of a school year. I've actually volunteered in a few schools that have done projects like this, where students built their own class garden and used that as a foundation for studying engineering, the environment, and even their own community. These students are constructing their own knowledge of the world around them by actively taking part in an educational experience, which fits the principles of constructivism perfectly. So, if the constructivist theory states that learning occurs entirely in the mind, how can we possibly notice when it's being put to use in a television show? Well, let's take a look at a 90s favorite, which does an amazing job of taking the idea of actively building knowledge and bringing it to life.
Oh! Blue knows, and we're gonna play Blue's Clues to figure it out. I love Blue's Clues.
Blue's Clues is the perfect example of personifying what constructivism looks like, despite the show taking place in a cartoony world where most of the household objects are sentient. Each episode revolves around a singular question. For example, what does Blue want for a snack? And expands upon it through each of the show's games and segments, building viewers' knowledge along the way. The game of Blue's Clues even ends with the host and the viewer having to literally construct the solution out of the 3 clues they were given during the episode.
So what could Blue want to buy with ice cubes, a cup, and lemons? Ooh. Do you think maybe that the lemons could wear the cup as a hat and then just slip around on the ice?
The problems that the characters work to solve are also ones that viewers could encounter in their own lives, which fits the aspect of the constructivist theory that encourages applying learning to the real world. Another more recent example of a program that uses these elements of constructivism is Super Why, which makes sense considering they were created by the same person. Thank you, Angela Santamero. Similarly to Blue's Clues, Super Why has interactive characters who construct their own knowledge and learning alongside the viewer. Each episode is centered on a given lesson or question, like perseverance, how to resolve a conflict with others, or even the importance of creativity and imagination. Super Why also happens to be a reading-focused show, so an engaged viewer will not only build knowledge surrounding the episode's moral, but also around literacy concepts like identifying letters, blending sounds together, spelling, and reading full sentences.
Now, let's zap throws into the sentence. Zap! Let's read it and see what happens. Snow White throws the apple. Did throwing the apple stop Snow White from eating it?
Yes!
Yes! Super job, super readers!
So that's constructivism in a nutshell. Learning takes place inside the mind, and the learner benefits from real-world scenarios where they can build their own knowledge. The final theory we'll be looking at is socioculturalism, which, as the name implies, moves away from studying the individual learner and instead focuses on the social aspect of learning. It takes on the viewpoint that learning is a purely social experience, and that interactions with other people are necessary for learning to take place. Socioculturalism also states that learning, both the topics and the process itself, changes among groups of people due to cultural differences. A great example of social learning tends to take place in early childhood classrooms, as children spend much of their time socializing and playing with others. This social play helps them to broaden their knowledge and make sense of the world around them. Another example of social factors influencing how learning takes place actually shows up in the structure of most schools. By placing students in classes made up of similar ages, schools are putting a focus on children's social development as well as their academics. All of this, of course, begs the question, how can educational TV shows possibly be seen through a sociocultural lens when watching TV isn't an especially social activity? This is where true ingenuity in the writing and structure of a show can really pay off. One tactic is used by both of the shows I mentioned previously, Dora and Blue's Clues. These shows have protagonists that break the fourth wall of the show to interact with the viewer, which includes them as a part of the episode. By keeping children engaged with the show in this way, the writers and actors have created a sort of pseudo-social situation, in which the viewer feels as if they are learning alongside the host and the other characters. This method of engaging viewers became very popular after Blue's Clues premiered in the 90s, and it has been used by a number of shows since. The other, arguably more common tactic is to have a character in the show's universe who acts as a sort of stand-in for the audience watching. This character will usually have a tendency to ask similar questions and want to learn about the same things as the child viewer. As they build knowledge by interacting with the other characters, so does the child watching the show. Some examples of such characters are Big Bird from Sesame Street, who interacts with the adult characters on the show to learn more about the world around him.
As a matter of fact, people can love each other and be different, and love different things.
Yeah, it keeps things interesting. Understand?
Well, maybe. Maybe it's sort of like Snuffy likes cabbages, and I like birdseed a lot, but we're still best friends, huh?
Right.
That's right.
And the child characters on Barney and Friends, who socialize with each other and Barney to learn concepts like letters, numbers, friendship, and playing pretend.
And then the pirate took his map, put it inside a magic bottle, and threw it into the ocean.
What's a treasure map?
It's pictures and words that tell you how to find something really special.
Oh!
One very popular piece of recent children's media that highlights the sociocultural side of learning is Bluey. The show has been praised by experts and audiences alike for how it conveys lessons about teamwork, imagination, and emotional regulation by having the characters navigate these topics and build their understanding of them together in a social way, rather than always coming to understand them on their own.
Sometimes you play a bit too rough with me.
Oh, bingo, really? Oh, sorry, Buster, I didn't realize.
I'm just gonna get better at using my bingo bark.
Okay, well, let's practice.
Okay.
So tell me, is this rough okay? Boing.
Yes, that's okay.
Okay, how about this rough? Boing.
Yes, that's okay.
Okay, what about this? Boing. Okay, too rough. Now I know.
Okay, now that we've taken a short dive into each of these theories, I just want to throw out a quick reminder that even though each one takes a fairly different stance on how the learning process works, none of them are right or wrong. I personally like to visualize each of them as a different pair of glasses that can be switched out depending on the scenario. Big shout out to my grad school professors for teaching me that metaphor. In fact, this is one of the great things about studying learning. You can look at a situation, or in this case, a TV show, through multiple lenses and get a different insight from each one. Let's give this a try using another classic program. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood premiered in 1968 and ran for an astounding 31 seasons. In that time, the program covered everything from feelings and emotions, to how things were made, to social topics like racism and even assassination. One segment that many viewers may remember focused on creativity and included a short film showing how crayons are made. Mr. Rogers starts the segment by showing off a box of crayons, making a small drawing, and then asking the audience if they've ever wondered how crayons are made, before moving on to the film. Throughout the film, Mr. Rogers narrates what's happening on the screen and asks questions to help spark the viewer's thinking. After the film is over, Mr. Rogers returns to his easel and begins to draw again. As he finishes his drawing, he points out to the audience that the picture would still just be inside his head if he hadn't sat down to draw it. And then the segment ends with the song, "You've Got to Do It."
You can make believe it happens, or pretend that something's true. You can wish or hope or contemplate a thing you'd like to do. But until you start to do it, you will never see it through. 'Cause the make-believe pretending just won't do it for you.
Now, this segment only takes up about 8 or 9 minutes of a 30-minute episode. But if we take the time to examine it through each of our 3 lenses, there is actually a lot to unpack about how Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood incorporates each learning theory into the program. We'll start with the socioculturalism lens, since that one is the easiest to spot. Throughout the segment, and most of the show in general, Mr. Rogers engages in a, quote, conversation with those of us in the audience, speaking directly to us, asking questions, and referring to us as if we are physically in the room with him. This is the same tactic used by shows like Blue's Clues and Dora, which I mentioned earlier. We as the audience are made to feel as though we are discovering and understanding things alongside Mr. Rogers, from how crayons are made to how we can use them to bring our imagined ideas to life. which turns this segment into a social learning experience.
See the crayons I have? Here's some small ones here, and here's some larger ones. I'll try these. Did you ever wonder how crayons were made? I've often thought about people making crayons. I'll do some more of this later, but I'd like to show you some people making crayons.
Now let's dig a little deeper using the behaviorism lens. At first glance, it may be difficult to decipher where behaviorism takes place in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, since there aren't any explicit examples of conditioning or rewards and punishments. However, if we take a look at the end of the segment, where Mr. Rogers explains to the audience that you've got to do it, there are clear moments of behavioral teaching and learning. The behavior Mr. Rogers is trying to implement into his child audience is that while imagining and playing make-believe is fun, those stories and ideas will never become real unless the person takes action to make them real. He reinforces this idea through the song, ending on the repeating line, "You did it." The reward for such behavior is, in this case, a completed drawing, while the punishment, for lack of a better word, for not engaging in this behavior is implied to be not having something tangible, something to be proud of that shows you did it.
You've got to do it, do it, do it, do it, then when you're through, you can know who did it, 'cause you did it, you did it. You did it. That's right. And it feels good to do things.
Finally, let's go even further beneath the surface by using the constructivism lens. As I mentioned before, this theory is a little harder to spot since the majority of the knowledge building takes place inside the learner's head. But if we pay close attention, we can spot certain intentional moves that the writers, and Mr. Rogers himself, make to help the audience engage in constructivist thinking. Mr. Rogers starts the segment by talking about the crayons in his collection and using them to draw a picture. By doing this, he's helping the viewer to establish themselves in a familiar experience with knowledge they have already constructed, since it can be assumed that most, if not all, children who watch the show have drawn on paper with crayons at some point prior to watching the episode. He then asks the audience if they've ever thought about how crayons are made, which leads into viewing the footage as Mr. Rogers narrates the process. The film itself is actually a great tool for building new knowledge, since it illustrates the process of making crayons step by step while also providing a visual aid. It's also important to note just how often Mr. Rogers speaks over the footage and how much he says.
This is a mold for lots of crayons. Each little hole will be filled with the colored wax. See how they pour that in? It's kind of a double bucket. And that colored wax is going down into all those holes. And a little later, each one of those holes will show a crayon coming up.
Notice how he only makes small remarks, giving just enough of an explanation for the viewer to understand what's happening, but also leaving room for the viewer to take in new information through the visuals. He also asks the audience questions, leading them to predict what might happen next and come up with ideas of what a particular machine is used for before revealing the answer.
Can you imagine what this machine is for? You know those things that go around crayons? Those are labels. Yes, so this is a machine that puts labels on the crayons.
Even as the film wraps up and Mr. Rogers returns to his easel, he continues engaging the audience in this same manner, exposing them to crayons of different sizes and shapes, and building up the idea of taking things from your imagination and bringing them to life. Each of these tactics, though seemingly insignificant, are actually vital moves made by Mr. Rogers and the show's writers to help their audience take what knowledge they currently have and expand on it to include new information and use that new information in a real-world context.
Now, I wouldn't have made that if I'd just been thinking about it. Just pretending about it, it wouldn't be there.
I hope that the examples I've given here have highlighted how creators of children's educational shows intentionally use learning theories to enhance their programs, and how there's a lot lurking beneath the surface that we never picked up on as kids, or maybe even as adults. While it's always fun to look back on these shows from a purely nostalgic standpoint, they only get more fascinating the deeper you dig into them. These characters and the people who created them helped shape our childhoods, and studying them from an educational point of view just makes it even more clear how much time, effort, and careful planning was put into designing programs that would not only develop the minds of generations, but stick with us long after we stopped watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to join me on this journey of learning theory and nostalgia, consider subscribing. I already have several videos planned for the coming months, and I'm so excited to share them with you. Also, let me know in the comments if there are any shows you'd want me to cover. I'm always open to suggestions. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.